Hello, everybody. Now that the sun has set and the evening gloom has set in, let's go even more gloomier topic, geopolitics, something that everybody likes. Usually it's more difficult to, I don't know what's more difficult, just starting right after lunch or starting right after tea, like afternoon tea. So we'll settle for it. I'm going to go quickly, and I want these 10 minutes to be a little bit of fun and refresher. And my main aim in this talk is to give you a little bit of nuggets of thoughts on how renewables affect geopolitics. Sounds like a mouthful, associate professor of international relations, in my previous life, I told many of you I was an academic, so if I go too professorial, and the slides, therefore, please my apologies in advance. But in a nutshell, what I'm going to tell you is three things. First, there is something special about renewables, okay? It's the way it relates countries to each other is beyond what we are used to in conventional geopolitics. But the second thing I want to make is it's not all kumbaya. Renewables brings a new set of geopolitical challenges that we should be aware of, and we should prepare ourselves as policymakers, as well as researchers and thinkers, or anybody who's interested in this. And I'm going to also touch upon civil conflicts and how a renewable energy can act as I don't want to call it a silver bullet, a panacea, but can act as a solution or a catalyzer to civil conflicts, one of the most important geopolitical challenges that we've seen since the Cold War, end of Cold War. So those are the 3 points. But some definitions first from Cambridge University Dictionary. I won't read it, but I'll just take 5 to 10 seconds so that you guys can read it, you folks can read it. But some of the underlying themes here is that countries are somehow predestined to be somewhere. We cannot move countries, though there is this very apocalyptic talk of moving the country of Maldives and other island nations elsewhere if things go really south. And the underlying logic with renewables that it is infinite, right? The sun replenishes, the energy that the sun bestows on this earth replenishes renewable energy over time, unlike fossil-based fuels. So where did I start thinking about that? While we were doing a lot of statistical analysis back in Riyadh, a finding came up over and over and over again. And this is, the graph that comes out. When we looked at how, different types of energy trade affects international conflict and especially interstate relations, we found that trade in cross-border electricity pacifies countries much more than trade in oil or gas, and coal, it really doesn't matter, it's the real fungible commodity good. And we started thinking about why could be the case and what respects, does trade in renewables, which is usually done through mostly for the time being, cross-border electricity trade, what really results in that? But in doing so, this is a very large topic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly revisit the 4 A's, not the energy trilemmas. Siddiq, are you here? No? Okay, but I'm going to do the Asian, Asia-Pacific Energy Research Council's 4 A's: accessibility, affordability, availability, affordability, and acceptability. So let's see how renewables change all these things. So first of all, renewables are infinite, but the prime real estate where you derive them from are not. And to further complicate things, there is also the transmission issue, right? So you might want to place them in places that matter the most. And this is also, the issue is like, especially with wind power, what you see is a lot of the high yield wind yielding areas tend to overlap with existing conflict zones. The Central African Republic, Chad, and South Sudan region. My beautiful country, Turkey, and my beautiful neighbor, Greece, where my family comes from, the Aegean, right? Or you look at the Sapporo Islands up northern, Japan. Right, and all of those places. So, and when you look at the data on, when states go to conflict each other, 2 most important things come about. First is border issues and exclusive economic rights, and the second is fisheries. Our, most dear, respected vice admirals and other, naval officials did talk about fisheries a lot. But the border conflicts, renewables can evoke a lot of border conflicts in ways that we haven't discussed yet. For GCC, that's not a big problem as such, because it doesn't really move to Iran's exclusive economic zone, and ashore of Bahrain and Kuwait and a little bit of Saudi Arabia, we have very good yielding places. But still, the second thing is availability. So this is the oil tanker trade routes, right? And any conventional geopolitical talk will show you the Malacca Straits, probably south of India, Gulf of Hormuz, probably, Suez, the Suez Channel and whatnot. But what if we turn into hydrogen, which is the real hype, nowadays, and how we can, ship renewable energy as a energy vector through hydrogen. And then suddenly some of these places, especially both sides of Saudi, both sides of the Gulf, also have further geopolitical burden. And it also you can enlarge this whole story to the overall world and think about a ship that's filled up with ammonia, which is both very poisonous and very explosive, right? And I think you guys can do the rest of the math in that respect. So it poses you a new set of geopolitical challenges that need to be managed. This is for you, sir. And also, there is a huge debate on ultra-high voltage transmission, and I won't go into the physics of that. But, there has been a lot of talk, especially by, Chinese officials on how to do this. But one thing that I should note, and you should all be taking note of, that the moment United Kingdom moved out of European Union, Ireland and France signed an agreement to wheel electricity with each other under the sea, circumventing the British Isles. Why would that be, right? Well, there's already an existing, undersea cable with enough capacity. Why would you start to build another one? But when you think about renewable future in an ideal or in a utopic future, if you can wheel electricity across continents, or across, make use of daytime differences or, seasonal differences, think about the geopolitical leverage it gives to transit states. Think about the other security issues that's out there in protecting these transmissions. And absent gargantuan leaps in better technology, like with oil or with gas, you have at least weeks or if not months of lead time. But with electricity, it doesn't work like it's an instantaneous good. So geopolitically, it puts you in a much, much more vulnerable position as such. And the story is not only where these lines would go through, but it's also the places where these lines will not go through, which countries it will circumvent, and which will put these countries into a more disadvantageous position. That can eventually also lead to more geopolitical, issues as such. And I'll, again, leave it at that. I don't want to utter the names of those countries. But I think it's quite obvious. One of them seems to be Turkey. The other one, I don't know. All right. But also, it comes the international political economy component of, renewable energy equipment. Here is another data that I prepared. Well, honestly, I didn't prepare it specifically for you. It's in a forthcoming chapter that I co-authored with my colleagues. But it shows you that over time, for Gulf countries, which is Qatar, the Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, and I think the final one was Oman. With Bahrainis and Kuwaitis, my apologies, there was not enough space for here. But what you see is that whom you buy from as the Gulf changes over time and by the country. So we don't have a uniform way of relying on either China or the EU or USA when it comes to renewable equipment. And the rest of the discussion follows, whether trade follows the flag follows the trade, and whether trade leads to, political prowess for the exporter as such. And I don't have time, I could have talked more, but I just want to sensitize you to this topic, all right? So I'm looking at Your Excellency, Madam, with United Arab Emirates is leaning slightly more on China, whereas, a couple of others, traditionally, the kingdom has been relying more on European Union with the wind power, but then they also reverted back to China over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of things back and forth going on. I promise one more minute and I'll be done. Finally, the acceptability dimension. This is the point where I would talk about the cobalt mines in DRC and, Atacama Desert. But I want to sensitize you one final topic. When we talk about geopolitics, it's not only interstate, it's also about intrastate. How non-state actors fight with each other within a state, which has huge spillover effects to the rest of the region. Think about how the Syrian conflict spilled over to the region. The Libyan conflict, still ongoing Libyan conflict, and many others all around the world, especially GCC, India axis, right? You got Afghanistan going on, you got Iraq going on, Syria going on, Libya going on, Sudan is not the most stable, there's Yemen and what's not. So renewables is in a sense, I put the Janus face here for a reason. So energy may be a means of establishing central rule, right? Because you give public goods, health, energy, education, and you tie the country back together. But if you have distributed and decentralized systems, right, it also can lead to, enables economic development and humanitarian development, which conflict resolution says that, which are the ultimate cases for the state to refunction again. Whether distributed systems can lead to centripetal or centrifugal tendencies in a post-conflict country recovering from civil conflict is out there for grabs. We don't know what's going to happen. So I think that's something for policymakers to watch closely. If you promote microgrids or renewables in certain localities, maybe it's going to work for the better, maybe it's going to work for the worse. If what you define by a good outcome is the re-emergence of the same nation state with the whole unified structure. That's all I have to say for now. Excuse me for extra 1 minute and 15-second pirate announcement. We will hold the International Association of Energy Economists Conference in Riyadh in February 2023. All are welcome. Thank you very much.
India, the largest democracy in the world, second largest population in the world, second largest telecommunication network in the world, third largest producer of steel in the world, fourth largest producer of power in the world, the youngest nation on this planet. But if there is one quotient which really derives and drives this country, is our level of aspiration. India and Indians, by the sheer magnitude of our average age, by far are probably one of the most aspirational lots in the world. And this is testament to the way the policies, the people, and the impact that it is creating across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to be part of this conference. Thank you, Jaival. Thank you, Dhaval, for giving me an opportunity to say my views. I think India and GCC have had an exceptionally good relation which goes down several decades. Whether it's about trade, whether it's about culture, whether it's about really understanding issues related to, we're not direct neighbors, but we're very close to each other. There have always been positives. This was further cemented by the fact that the trade relation, the earlier speaker just mentioned some numbers which I completely concur with, has increased exponentially over the last few years. This was primarily driven because of the foreign policy initiatives that our government has taken, further strengthening the initial decisions that have happened over the last few decades. What is very interesting to note is that both these regions, and obviously GCC comprises of several countries and all countries are very close to India, each of this country has a very special relationship with India. Whether it's UAE, whether it's Oman, whether it's Kuwait, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Bahrain, each of them has had various initiatives, joint programs. They provide a great opportunity for Indians, both skilled and not skilled. In many instances of speeches that I've heard of very prominent Arab leaders, they have openly acknowledged India's contribution to building their own countries, which is rightly so. And we really appreciate the magnanimity with which they accept this. The most important facet of this relationship is that how do we go from here on? And earlier, Madhukeshwar, my friend, who mentioned this point about setting some important principles, which I completely concur with. I mean, the fact that India is at a very important point in its history, primarily driven by a very strong political leadership and an equally effective administrative acumen. We would not say that we are there in terms of every single aspect of governance that needs to be covered. But most importantly, we are a very dear friend
and we are very, very assertive. We have never been so assertive ever in our lifetime as a country. What that does is that it allows us to have conversations like these that ORF has organized, taking central position, which was for a very long time denied, not on purpose, but just the fact that, the Indians were not articulate enough about the contributions that they can make in the region and the world. And how can that be a defining moment for a more equitable world? India has a very rich legacy, a legacy of great culture, of great leadership. We have all studied and imbibed it. Most of the Indians carry it with them. And in the decisions that we make, it's always one world decisions. It's never me first. And that will predominantly drive both our foreign policy and our goals that we need to achieve. We are here in Maharashtra, which is a most important contributor of the national economy. We contribute to about 20% of the GDP. Our GDP is bigger than that of Singapore. And what is most critical is that about 65% of the population of Maharashtra is less than 27 years of age. It is not a surprise that my boss, at the age of 44, was the chief minister of the state in 2014. And the reason being is that across the length and breadth, whether it's government, whether it's the private sector, the young people are taking over responsibilities and following a single focused agenda of making sure that how India as a country, Maharashtra as a state, India as a country, contribute to more enhanced relationship. When it comes to innovation and startups as well, there has been immense learning and inspiration from some of the initiatives that GCC countries took. Dubai has been literally a world leader. I mean, every single time we go to that region in some of the countries, it just fascinates us at the pace at which reform is occurring. And a very planned, focused reform, which is sustainable. It's not just done in harakiri or just to be in a race to get ahead of someone. And I think that's a more important principle. That when you grow, you have to take into cognizance the impact that your growth or your aspiration leaves behind for future generations. And the lead that the Honorable Prime Minister has taken in this regard is that that's the reason why we are probably the most compliant when it comes to the Paris Agreement. And the whole world acknowledges it. I mean, we obviously have a very, very high growth rate expectation. I mean, the Honorable Prime Minister has set up a $5 trillion economy goal. Maharashtra has a $1 trillion economy goal. We have all the necessary caveats in place, but our growth is a function of how the world moves. So we cannot grow in isolation. We are very tightly coupled with the world economy. We are very tightly coupled with GCC. And our increased, enhanced relationships and dialogue will only strengthen both these countries, both these regions. I mean, there are multiple countries within GCC and India as a country. There is a lot that has happened over the last 12 to 18 months. I mean, I don't want to cite some of the, detailed discussions that have happened with, various heads of state there. But whether it's related to food security, whether it's related to technology transfer and initiation, whether it's related to conversation on oil and some of the other associated areas where there are, collaborative strengths, India and various regions or various countries within the GCC will only take this step forward. As far as Maharashtra is concerned, I just want to leave you with this thought that in the process of planning a $1 trillion economy, absolutely, I mean, young people are going to contribute, but we have to make sure that it doesn't become, so a demographic dividend can quickly become a demographic curse if you do not have the right governance principles when it comes to engaging youth in a positive fashion. Whether it's related to giving them the right skill set, whether it is making sure that they're aligned with the objectives that whether the country or the region serves. And this important aspect of collaboration, whether within the country and outside the country, is very crucial. Most of the policies framework that will happen also will take into cognizance the fact that there is an important relationship that exists between these two regions. While the empirical principle continues to be of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which basically means that you have to be self-reliant or you have to be self-sufficient, but the self-sufficiency is always a function of an ecosystem. You cannot, in isolation, become sufficient to anything. Your self-sufficiency is a function of somebody aiding the process, your vision, and vice versa. So I continue to believe that there is a great synergy between these two regions. I would encourage ORF to pursue this almost every year. This year we couldn't participate very aggressively as a government because we had too many things going on. In fact, today was a very, very busy day, or else the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister was very keen to participate in this event. But we will definitely watch this space and continue to support the initiatives that ORF and the allied organizations are taking in the pursuit of bringing these two regions together. There is nothing better than getting minds to have a conversation about how we can build a better world. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the next panel here, which is about green mobility. I'm delighted to have an excellent panel of experts here with us. And I'm going to ask questions, if you allow me, to make it a bit more interactive and fun, if that's possible with this subject. Now, quickly about me. As you know, I'm the director of the Oil and Gas Division in the Ministry of Energy in Saudi Arabia. And as such, I do short-term and long-term market analysis of the entire energy complex, of which oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, and everything that comes after that belongs to. As such, of course, we look at the world, how it looks now, and the world, how it looks in 10, 20 years from now. And green mobility is one element in the analysis and research for everyone dealing with that subject of energy transition and global market outlooks and energy overall. And it's on everybody's mind, but not many know what it means. So let's define it first. And I'm delighted to have this panel with us. You have the names in front of you. I have a fellow Riyadi, Emre Hatibolo, from the CAPSARC think tank in Riyadh, which, if you haven't seen it, Google it, go to YouTube. It's designed by Zaha Hadid. Looks like a spaceship in the desert. So have a look at CAPSARC. It's amazing. And he's lucky to live there. So wonderful to have you with us, Emre. Then we have also, of course, Shaima Al-Sharkawi, who gave a speech earlier. We have Nilanjan Ghosh, and we have Sharvari Patki, and I'm the moderator. That's right. So everyone, did we forget you? Sorry. Kiran Raju. I actually underlined you for green robotics. Great. So we all are here. We all bring different experiences, but we need to define it first. So I'll ask Emre, if you don't mind, to just define what do we mean by green mobility in the context of the massive, let's call them mega trends in the energy transition. If I may just add to that, mega trends being electrification, autonomous driving or mobility, and clean energy to transport in the transportation sector to ensure that this is going. These are three mega trends in the context but how would you define green mobility? And then from then onwards, we get straight into the discussion.
Actually, I'll complicate it even further. Even the word green is, under debate. Is it green or blue or turquoise or, take your pick, right? So I think really we touched upon actually, in essence, a very important, this is one of these things when you say green transition, green mobility, everybody thinks what that means, but when you delve deeper into it, the debate suddenly branches out more than you think. But I think you touched upon most of the important points. So anything that replaces carbon, avoids carbon, but in doing so brings in many alternative players to the mobility ecosystem. Could be, I'm going to touch maybe retails, personal finance, innovative schemes. So anything that kind of pretty much moves out of our conventional oil and gas value chain, I think could be defined as green mobility. One thing I want to add is also public transport. It's also green no matter what you're using. So you can also approach from the individual perspective. And so you can say per carbon dioxide emissions or CO2 equivalent emissions per mile traveled for anybody. So I think that could be a good start. I kept it general for a purpose. But
excellent, excellent. Well done. Kiran, now that you are the founder and CEO of Green Robotics India, when you are dealing with green mobility or mobility where it's less CO2 emitting, what comes to your mind and what is your contribution or your thinking from an entrepreneur's but also from a technological perspective in that regard?
Sure. For me, when I thought about green, I was looking at life from the standpoint of that we actually waste a lot of resources. So for me, wastage was the point of contention. So when I looked at solutions using technology in that space, I mean, just to think about it, everyone here would probably have flown at least 4 hours and driven at least 3 hours to be here, right? So imagine the carbon footprint of that. So I think some of the technologies we touch in green robotics is how to look at meta as a space to replace this, how to look at transportation where just to deliver one box, you're not sending a whole truck. How to really bring in efficiencies using artificial intelligence. I think that's where our core focus is. And so when I look at generation of energy, I'm saying that okay, that's a different subject which I don't know much about, Siddiq. But when in generation we are looking at the efficient use of it, and the third part is recycling is also again another area which I believe delivers a green value. Which again, as green robotics, we don't have much knowledge in it, but efficiency is our core area where we focus on.
Excellent. Now, as you know, all of you, we look at the world and we look at the demographics of an economy and how it grows over time, and we look at the transportation sector in particular to understand energy demand in terms of the combustible engine, but also in terms of what will be the EV penetration of such a growing economy. Now you, Sharvari, as the program head of Electric Mobility WRI India, you're the right person to ask here. Electric mobility the name is saying everything. How do you forecast electric mobility in India and besides India in the rest of the world in order to support the argument that the electrification of mobility is actually taking place, and how you actually come up with assumptions that say, therefore, governments or investors should focus on that or not?
Thank you so much for that long question.
Sorry.
Just to define how do I define green mobility is, if the vehicles are powered by electrical power, and that power comes from a green grid with a sustainable battery management, disposal management, probably that is how I would define how the green mobility would look like, rather should look like. When you talk about do you think or do we think investors should put their money in electric mobility? Probably answer is obviously yes. I'll give you a quick example. Let's talk about e-bus tender, which has recently happened. CESL and WRI India has actually led those efforts. And that was the world's largest electric bus tender. Just to give you mathematics, diesel bus would cost you around 80 rupees per kilometer, whereas a 12-meter electric bus would cost you around 45 rupees, a 9-meter, and 12-meter would cost you 50 rupees. These numbers are without subsidies. With subsidies, they are even much lower than them.
Can you elaborate on the cost so I understand? What exactly does that cost cover?
Okay, I have to probably go back a little. So earlier, all state transport units used to own the buses. They used to buy from manufacturer and they will run those buses. The maintenance, driving, and the ticketing becomes their baby. With electrification transition, they entered into gross cost contract. So now the buses are on the books of OEM. They are the one who maintain it. They are the one who drive it. The ticketing comes to STUs. So there is a significant role change that what has happened. The operator of state bus transport has now become the regulator. So all those inefficiencies, which was part of the earlier STU, has gone out. And just to give you mathematics, we are looking at 50,000 buses. And that rupees 80 to rupees 45 have come because of the demand aggregation as well. If you talk about 50,000 buses, which is the new target set up by CESL, we will be requiring 1 lakh Indian rupees crore of investment only to put into the STU of Indian ecosystem. Here I'm not counting about remaining 4,50,000 private buses, which are corporate buses or school buses or private player. 50,000 number is just consolidated number for state transport units. So I think investors see that there is a potential and the business model itself is lucrative. That is how things have started moving in that direction. And business model will evolve. Nobody had thought earlier that BEST would not be buying bus, but would be acting like a regulator, which is a new norm. So I think...
Do you do forecasts as well and to analyze the future of the number of these vehicles on the roads?
Yes, we do. And accordingly, we do geospatial analysis and we propose where should be that charging infrastructure install. For example, for buses, we do route optimization along with the STU. So that's a whole lot of things.
Excellent. Final question. What's the source of the energy there? Is it purely renewables based? It's not.
Not yet.
So what is it?
If you talk about Indian power grid, 40% comes from renewable. So we have a lot of to catch up on the grid.
60% from
the coal.
Coal.
Primarily.
So it's not entirely green, but it is...
It is not.
Yeah, but it is at least the last bit of the chain is
and
less
probably you
CO2
get
emitting.
benefit because of the better efficiency of electrical drive than what you have in the ICE vehicle.
But it's important to just point it out. When we talk about green mobility, it's not as green as it always sounds. We need to be conscious of that, and that's an important point to be just a bit realistic in our analysis. Now, Nilanjan Ghosh, thank you very much. Nilanjan, you're the director of the Center for New Economic Diplomacy at the ORF. Glad to have you with us, of course. Now, what's your view as a researcher, as someone who looks at the new economy, as your title indicates? How do you view this?
Let me come to your first question, that is on the definition. I have a bit of a different view on this. Different view in the sense that, first of all, I look at green mobility as a socio-economic ecological process which is going to lead to this transition. It's not merely energy transition in the transport sector. On the one hand, in fact, you are going to have maybe electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, which you are talking of, which is going to emit less. On the other hand, the demand for linear infrastructure is increasing over time, and that is going to entail land use change. And with that land use change, which we have actually envisaged till 2030, you are simply going to cut down forests, you are simply going to convert agro-ecosystems to linear infrastructure. Now, these systems have been absorbing or stocking the carbon for years. In the process, what is happening is you are reducing carbon emission from the transport sector, but at the same time, in order to cater to the transport sector, you are creating roads which is emitting the carbon to the atmosphere. So in the process, if I look at define green mobility, you have to look at the net impact. So green mobility can only be green enough if there is a net cutting off of the CO2 emission in the process. That is why I use the term that it's a socio-economic ecological process. Here I have talked about, so I need to talk about behavioral change, which is social in nature. I need to talk about the economic instruments. How can I change the terms of trade from the traditional fuel-based transport system to the green transport system, and how I can essentially create more robust and green infrastructure without compromising with the blue-green infrastructure that already exists, that is compromising with the natural capital and the carbon sequestration process. And that is how, in fact, we need to look at the entire green transition process. Am I making sense? I don't know.
No, very interesting. Yes, it makes sense. So, so now to our friend from Egypt, Shaima, Madame Shaima. From your experience in Egypt, and as someone who gave an interesting speech earlier, what initiatives are needed to accelerate innovation in this space? Can you share some of your experiences, maybe from Egypt or in general?
Yes, I'm already prepared this. The necessary initiatives to accelerate transformation and innovation in the clean transport sector. I make this as a symbol of green transition. Transport sector are one of the most important priorities that must be taken into consideration by all countries. Because the transport sector is one of the most important driving forces in development process. And therefore, innovations must be adopted in stages. The first stage focuses on weakness in the transportation industry. While the second stage comes to discuss the concept of mobility in order to enhance the resilience of countries and ensure that individuals are connected to basic services. As for the third stage of initiatives to accelerate innovation in the clean mobility sector, it comes to reaching ambitious solutions that reduce the carbon footprint for existing and the new transmission system. Among the most important innovations to advance the sector towards achieving climate sustainability are transforming policies and investments in design of transportation networks, vehicle efficiency, demand management, regional development, and land use. We also see that road safety is another very important challenge that the transport sector must address. Road accidents claim the lives of more than 1.35 million people, 93% of whom are from developing countries, while another 15 million road users are seriously injured annually. Road deaths and injuries reduce GDP in low and middle-income countries by an estimate 1% to 5%. In traffic, this could be halved than the per capita GDP in selected countries could be raised by 22% within 2 decades.
Excellent. That actually brings a question to my mind that's maybe something that everyone can answer or think about, which is, what do you think is actually necessary? Is it policies and regulations, or is it technological innovation, or is it an investment push to go into this green mobility? What would you say is important, or is it all together, or is there something that we are missing here? And the reason why I'm asking that is, you know, coming from Europe, myself, Germany, to be precise, and the UK, there's a lot of policy push, right? Until the Russia-Ukraine invasion kicked in, and suddenly we are here in the GCC and asking for LNG, as you saw yesterday with the German government being in the UAE, etc. Now, that doesn't mean that they reject the policies that they made, but they just said, when the pockets of the consumer, which is the voter, hurts, we have to do what every other nation is doing, right? Now, so is a question of the external factors and the internal policy dynamic. But how would you say, from your experience, where should the focus be? Sharvari, what's your view on that?
I would probably say we need to have three-layer approach. Let's bucket it out into demand side, charging infrastructure, and supply side. When you talk about demand side, demand aggregation like e-bus tender would help to warrant good prices so that the business model becomes self-sustainable. You don't need a incentive to make it happen. When you talk about charging infrastructure, you need that clarity of thought, how you would like to take it as a nation. So for example, here we are really fortunate when Niti Aayog came out with a charging infrastructure guide 2 years back and said, hey, if you want to look at the charging infrastructure, this is how the structured way of thinking about it look like. And when I talk about supply side, that layer will take care of the ZEV mandate, what entire California and many European countries are talking about, which will actually compel all original equipment manufacturers, all the vehicle manufacturers to put some percentage of electric vehicle in the market. The moment you have a good supply options, people who are sitting on the fence, who are looking for electrification, but as on date today, they do not have enough models to bet their hedge their bet on. They would be jumping, and it's the technology transition curve. Once you cross that 13.5%, it is going to flip. The market will pivot by itself.
Okay, Emre, what is your take on that?
Sure. First of all, thank you for not pushing us towards the dichotomization or trichotomization. Probably the truth is somewhere in between. But if we talk about innovation, right, number one thing we should be aware is it should be okay to fail. I mean, innovation is failure. But here comes the dilemma. Markets are okay with failure. A lot of the time, politics are not. Right? So how do we resolve this dilemma is what has been, the experience of throughout the whole world. One of your home countries, Germany. Yes, it did fail with the initial solar policy and the feed-in tariffs, but the whole world learned a lot. So no, whatever literature you read, everybody is thankful for Germany's experiment that failed. But it was a big public good, for the whole world. So again, it's a process. But that takes me to actually another point. So there are, coming to the policy world, there are retrospective policies and there are prospective or proactive policies, right? There's a lot of regulatory burden. India is suffering through it. My home country, Turkey, does, if you find time from discussing unnecessary stuff. The whole world does. My home country, my adopted country, Saudi Arabia, does. But besides that, there are proactive policies that we could undertake. Conflict resolution and arbitration. It's not only products, commodities, but it's services too. It's a holistic approach, as Naranjan said. So how about the demand response business that will be born out of EVs? How about the grid stabilization promises that we're going to give? When we have problems in those markets, how will we solve those? And I think the states play a very important role in proactively addressing these conflicts so that we have an innovative part where everybody can step in and move the whole world towards green mobility.
This is such a crucial point you're making, which leads us to basically to the nitty-gritty. Grid is the right word here. The transmission, the ability to connect the infrastructure so that charging stations, infrastructure is sufficiently spread, and governments need to be involved in there, and investors and businesses as much as anyone. So from your perspective,
sorry, I have a brief comment.
Sure, please.
We must invest in a human factor. We must invest in a human factor, his brain, and he will do everything in a good way. We must make rehabilitation to reach to empowerment of everything, not in green mobility only.
Sorry, you say human factor?
Human factor, yes.
In the sense?
Brain. We must educate him. We must awareness him.
I see.
Aware him.
So policymakers are also responsible
Yes.
to lead to a paradigm shift in the mindset of the people to embrace this
Yes,
transition
yes.
and green mobility.
We
This
must,
is a point you made
we
earlier
must
as well.
rehabilitation.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Your turn. Can we use that microphone, please?
Before I come to your question, just to
You always avoid the question and go to the other one.
No, I don't want to avoid that. Rather, you need that kind of a prelude to that. These are some data, in fact, which I think I should place. Because I presume Emre mentioned about the public goods nature. This is the I just estimated, and these are not yet peer reviewed, that right now, in fact, 14% of energy-related direct CO2 emissions are from the transport sector. And India, at this point in time, is emitting 2.6 billion tons of CO2 from fossil fuel annually. And if I consider the social cost of CO2 for India, sitting in 2022 as 86 billion, as USD 86 per ton, then at this point in time, the cost imposed on the Indian economy is 31.3 billion US dollar, which is 1% of the Indian GDP. And if at all we reduce this 1 billion ton of CO2 emission, which we have planned to do by 2030, then the sheer economic gain is to the tune of 86 billion US dollar, which is 2.8% of the Indian GDP. Now, let me come to your question that given this public goods nature and given the enormity of this entire problem, what essentially can be done from what you mentioned, from the supply and the demand side? Let me just rephrase that from the input and the product side. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, of course, which Emre mentioned, the role of the government. It actually emerges from both ways. One is from the tax and the subsidy side. You have to think about, one is that the entire value chain in terms of the production. How do I incentivize the entire value chain? One is the input subsidy, and of course, rationalization. In India, we have the GST. In other places, of course, you have to rationalize the input taxes in a different way. On the other side, as far as the union budget of India is concerned, there is already a tax benefit which is being provided for those who are buying actually an electric vehicle. Now the issue is that if you look at the entire buying pattern in India, it's mostly in the E2Ws, or the electric two-wheelers, and some portion is in the E3Ws. More than actually 80% is in the E2W and the E3W sector, and nominally it's been in the E4W sector. So on the other side, what is happening is that you need the direct input subsidy, but at the same time, relaxing the norms of these auto loans, especially in fact in all the sectors, and also the mass surface transport mechanism. In fact, this is a very recent report prepared by the Niti Aayog and the Rocky Mountain Institute, India. And according to them, the financing size, market size is going to be $5 billion by 2025 and $46.25 billion by 2030. This is the Indian market that I'm talking of, as far as electric vehicles are concerned. And the Reserve Bank of India essentially has been, they are contemplating at this point in time, that this should be part of priority sector lending. And how do you essentially categorize this as part of the priority sector lending as far as the clean vehicles are concerned? Based on 5 principles. A, socioeconomic potential. B, livelihood generation potential. C, scalability. Techno-economic viability. And stakeholder acceptability. So eventually there is already a thinking in this way. So, which Emre mentioned that yes, the policy level intervention has to be from the input to the product side, covering that entire value chain. Price incentives, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder education, and eventually creating that kind of a process, a socio-economic process by way of which you can actually entice producers as also the consumers.
Great point, really. Kiran, you as an entrepreneur and businessman and founder of Green Robotics, how's your experience been? How has it been here in India to set it up, to develop it, to to also look into this point regarding subsidization. Is your company subject to such support, or have you done it only purely with the classical investments? How did it come about, basically?
It is done by classical investments, but I think one of the key points we always look at, I think other than policy, investment and innovation, economics is the most important factor. Personal economics especially, right? I'll give you a great example which policy cannot change, but innovation and investment is all right. Yeah. But something as simple as commute, right?
Yes,
commute.
Yes. Commute
Yeah. is such a classic example of CO2 emission, also migration to cities, right? And this has happened a lot before COVID. After COVID, there is a mindset change, because today organizations are used to not having office space for 1/3 or half the workforce. So automatically that changes a substantial amount of passenger transport, which is actually one of the biggest contributors for CO2 emissions. So the gap there is bridged by technology and cannot be bridged by policy, because even if policy puts a regulation saying that, okay, from now on, 1/5 or 1/3 is cannot come to office, organizations will take that as a way to move out of that particular area, maybe. So policy cannot change it, but the innovation of technology is able to give an organization I would say the ability to look at the finances and saying that, okay, now I can save this office space money, which makes me gives me an ability to hire in tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities at a much lower price, but they need not come to office every day, which reduces the commute distance. So we see a lot of demigration happening in cities because of this change that is happening. Like I said, I would say, even as a company, when I go to a customer, I always look at one simple thing: how do I touch your personal economics and reduce that cost, right? While picking a solution that is going to actually reduce carbon emissions. There are a lot like that. Just like commute, there are so many like that we do, which we can bring.
Excellent. I would like to contextualize it into what we should mention, or should have mentioned at the outset, which is the famous energy trilemma, right? Mm-hmm. The challenge of sustainability, climate change, affordability of energy, and the security of supply, energy security. This is the energy trilemma that every nation and the world is really dealing with. And with the recent crisis, i.e. the affordability problem, swapping from usually the emerging economies into the Western economies, suddenly it clicked in some policymakers' heads in the West, or became more prevalent. So within that trilemma, let's now look at the GCC and India world and potential. How can the GCC, and maybe Emre, if I may ask you, with its recent shifts of economic diversification, the green strategy of Saudi Arabia as well as the Middle East overall, how do you think can this shift add value to the energy transition overall and green mobility in particular? And in what way could there be an overlap or partnership?
Sure. I will focus on the global one so that my very dear colleagues and participants can add on the other one. Ms. Rao said something here. She said it's time to look at each other. A mentor of mine said that great love spark when you look at each other, but if you want to carry it longer term, you should look together to the future. So I think this is a good time that India and the GCC countries can put their way in the global governance of green mobility. As a matter of fact, I prepared a picture, just one single slide, just to make my point. What you're going to see is something I prepared from an existing data set that looks at voting schemes in UN General Assembly. And when the picture comes up, what you're going to see is a lot of the leaders of the developing country have started voting like India. and you see a grouping of, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Russia.
There we go.
Even there you go.
Okay.
So the solid colors, they start, grouping up there, and the very high up is India's reference point. So the higher you go, the more likely you are, the more similar you are to India. And the bottom two countries are Germany and United States, respectively. So we may have a window of opportunity here where GCC and India can push certain norms in global governance of green mobility all around. And I just want to give another quote from 3 days ago by Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm of United States. And she said, and I want to read it so I don't want to misquote it. She said this about sustainable aviation fuels. She said, quote, the sustainable aviation fuels plan, quote, will help American companies corner the market on a valuable emerging technology, unquote. So if this is the approach, cornering the global market is from another leading country in the world, I think the GCC and India has a lot of moral high grounds too to push a new system that's equitable and that serves pretty much all the players included therein. I won't go into details a lot, but there are a lot of things to be done, global governance-wise. Industry standards, how to account for avoided carbon or how to allocate carbon across the whole value chain. These are, debates of tomorrow that I think where this, Arabian Sea center point gravitas could help. Likewise, how to relate, emerging commodity trade issues regarding green mobility to WTA frameworks. That's another thing that's coming up in global governance of green mobility, on which I think GCC and India could prepare together.
Excellent, very, very helpful, and thanks for the slide. Nila Sharvari, it's back to you. Do you think this development here in India is something that can be attracting GCC players to either come in as partners, investors, maybe in the future as the energy transition is unfolding, as a supplier of different and new forms of energy? How do you see the potential here?
I definitely see investors getting attracted to India for 2 to 3 reasons. Let's go, one point I really resonated is why two-wheeler electric vehicle is so popular and so picked up, because there is a cost parity. The end user is not buying electric vehicle because it is green, because it is not emitting tailpipe. He will simply buy if it is economical. He will simply buy if the running cost, the operation cost is better than the ICE vehicle. In two-wheeler segment, if you talk about startup, there are 398 startups which are registered on eAmrit who are working in the electric mobility sector, and the kind of funding they have ranges from $304 million to multiple smaller investment. I see these startups as a strong ray of hope where people can put their money because it is a good business model. Not because it is green, because the investor is going to invest when he has a surety that they are not going to burn their money. No investor in the world would come and say, hey, find this $100 and you can blow it to be green. I don't think that is going to happen.
That's very interesting, and brings me to another thought that the whole investment and finance world has had a push towards investments into green, but then recently with all the things that happened, they are now, well, actually, does it make money or not, our investment? And suddenly there's this discussion amongst the investment world going on. And I think you made a point of economics and the commerciality. Now you are confirming that. So at the end of the day, we need to be able to make sure it's affordable, and you propose the subsidies or the analysis of subsidies as a way of pushing it. But at the end of the day, that needs to be also covered. We have a couple of minutes left for it, but please go ahead, Kiran.
Yeah, I think when we look at GCC and India, I think one of the core commodities we are missing out is the data exchange and how precise data is and how real time it is.
Excellent.
Because that drives demand and supply, so reduce wastage, right? So I think that exchange, is crucial. And I think new platforms are coming in place to do that.
Music to my ears, given that I deal with so many data sources, and Emre, I'm sure you do, and everyone here. It really is a question of how we look at the data we have, because everything, all your models, every forecast is basically a function of the data input. And if you have certain assumptions in believing EVs will be penetrating India's market or GCCs or America or Europe at this rate, another data set may show you a completely different set. And at the end of the day, policymakers need to make decisions based on that. So an excellent point. I think this was a very interesting debate. Thank you very much. I'll open it up to the audience. Who's carrying microphones? Okay. Question here at the front.
I'm Vice Admiral Luthra. My question is that the current estimates indicate that that the E part, the e-mobility part, in the global primary energy supply is just at about 2% of the overall primary energy supply. And it may vary from country to country or group to group. In India and GCC, it may be different, but globally it is just at about 2%. From what I hear, I see that it is possible that every % increase in this may have a disproportionate impact, because it may not be linear, disproportionate impact as far as the decarbonization effort is concerned. That is quite likely. But my question is that in the overall debate on energy transition, assuming that I do not know what are the targets that have been set by GCC and by India of taking this 2%, let us say, which is global level, but at their respective levels, in the energy mix to take as a primary energy supply to take it to 10% or 15% or 20%, what are the targets in India and what are the targets in the GCC, or whether those targets are similar? And even if you take to those, even if you reach those levels, in the overall energy transition game, what will be the contribution of this sector?
Excellent.
Thank you.
You want to go ahead? Microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Luthra, this is a very interesting question. I can't respond to that fully, but I have some figures to state here, because this was some kind of a sensitivity analysis that I was conducting in the Indian context. Well, we have this target called EV30 at 30. This is a campaign in India, which implies that at least 30% of vehicles sold in the country are clean by 2030. Say, if this is the scenario, what happens? If this is the scenario, then in fact, well, in terms of sheer social cost of carbon, when I monetize that, we save out $6 billion US. Now, this cost on the other side has a multiplier effect, because when the way you define social cost of carbon is something like what is the cost due to hospitalization, number of morbid days, loss in marginal product of labor, finally loss in productivity, and finally the loss to the GDP. So if you consider this multiplier effect, it is going to be, say, 2.6 or 7 times. So this is with 30% reduction, when 30% of the vehicular fleet is moving towards this element. Now, if at all we have, say, by 2030, we are talking about to the tune of 1 ton decarbonization. Social cost of carbon today is $86. By 2030 for India, it is going to be, say, around 1.5 times of that, if it is business as usual. And if it is that particular figure, then you can make out that it's going to be $86 today's price, $86 billion US today's price into 1.5. I don't know what will be the growth rate, but if we consider that, it will be around 3 to 5% of the Indian GDP will be saved in the process, and eventually that is going to have its own multiplier effect.
Maybe if I can get it back to your point, the overall share of renewables, if I understand you correctly, as a part or share of the total primary energy mix today is around what you said, 2%.
Not all renewables.
Wait, what? Only
EV.
EV as a share of the transportation?
EVs is 2%. Wind and solar
As
is another 2%.
a share
so,
of the-
wind and solar is another 2% in the total primary energy supply.
mix. But you're speaking of the transportation
I'm saying
sector.
that if both GCC and India are able to meet their EV targets, whatever 10 as in the primary energy mix, if you take this 2% to 10%, and if we achieve those targets, but in the overall energy transition story, where do we stand still?
I totally get it. Maybe you want to add something to that. And please hand the microphone to someone else, otherwise the Admiral is going to grill us the whole day. So, okay, thank you.
To give you background about targets, in COP26, PM Narendra Modi has agreed to the world that India agrees to make renewable as a 50% of the overall power generation mix by 2030. And at the same time, we have taken a target of renewable overall base, 50% of that new base. That's the COP commitment, COP26 commitment, 2030. Correct. To give another angle to that, today EV is just probably less than 1% of the overall fleet. Even if it becomes 100% electrified by the end of, I think, 2070, the overall impact on the power grid base would be 25%. If you ask, currently, is electric mobility truly green? The answer is no. It's not truly green. But at some point of time, we will catch up with that race, that electrical vehicles becoming more in number, and at the same time, grid becomes greener. We can't wait one to happen and other not to happen. We have to go hand in hand. Then there will be transition days.
Excellent. Emre, please.
Just 5 seconds, just a small warning. We're talking about percentages, but in absolute terms, the denominator is growing. So I won't go into the figures, but I ran through different scenarios. I'll give you the median one. Business as usual, 70 million electric vehicles by 2050, 300 million by the aggressive scenario out of, like, say, 450 million vehicles. But no matter how you calculate it, diesel remains the king. And the diesel consumption of India in absolute terms does not drop pretty much, or increases otherwise. So percentages-wise, things may look better, but overall, carbon emitted or CO2 equivalent emitted, it's still not a very, promising picture.
Yeah, we have room for one more question. Please.
It's more. Thank you, Sadiq. This is to do with your big tender, and I commend how you thought of it in terms of aggregating the demand. And what happens to the supply side? Was that a single company that was controlling the delivery of the service, and now one will probably take it on? Or was there many players, and what will happen to them from a regulatory point of view? Are they going to be sharing part of the pie? Are they going to be basically given some subcontracts? What's going to happen if one player win on the supply end?
It won't happen that way. That, for example, all 5,000 buses goes to only one companies all the time. It will be everybody will take share in the pie. That is how things will evolve.
Okay, and they will be ready to accept this new model? Okay.
They have already probably accepted, because the first tender is already done. OEMs have already accepted it. At the same time, is it really a complete risk-proof model? We don't know that yet. Organizations like CSL is in the continuous monitoring stage. There are some methodologies which has been already taken to minimize the risk perception, because ultimately owning a bus is not OEM's routine business. He is also coming out of his comfort zone. It will take some time to settle it, but we foresee that is probably one of the prevailing business model in coming years.
Excellent. I think there are no further questions unless okay. Last question last question.
Hi, I talked about this a little earlier about having a regional grid. How possible is an underwater grid?
All right, we heard him saying that before.
Exactly.
How realistic
is this something? You say you talk about energy transition. Can energy transition from region to region? I mean, if you're doing data, can you do electricity?
Yeah. There's an interesting question, an electric grid that goes through the Arabian Sea between India and GCC.
I'm probably not the right person to answer that.
I've built a microgrid in the past, and the losses of energy, like data, the losses are very minimal, right? But energy, the loss of transmitting during transmission is reasonably high. I think distances, that is why distances are a challenge. Just a very basic high level. But
because of the medium, which is water, or is it because of the distance?
it's the voltage drop, and what it's going through also impacts the voltage drop.
Yeah.
So just basic electronics. I'm not like the expert on this, but basic.
In terms of simple mathematics, the moment you increase the distance, voltage drop increases the power loss. If you want to minimize the power loss, you have to increase the cable size. Beyond a certain level, you can't increase power size for thousands of kilometers. You have to go, today the grid is settled as probably 440 kilovolt. You have to go to higher level. You have to figure out ways that how do we direct DC, high voltage DC current, HVDC. It's
technicalities.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I think that was very helpful. Please join me in thanking this excellent panel of experts today. Thank you very much.